I'm Harmon Dash, and welcome to the premiere edition of Make It Fair. We're a nonpartisan group hoping to shed some light and perspective on a variety of issues pressing to the public good. The word indivisible, its most basic meaning, is that which cannot be divided. The Pledge of Allegiance to the American flag ends with the assertion that we, as Americans, are indivisible, with the promise of liberty and justice for all. Though it can be argued more and more that promise for liberty and justice has been kept for fewer and fewer Americans, a growing number of our citizenry feeling like they are on the outside looking in. Today, historians suggest that we are as divided as we were over a century and a half ago during America's Civil War, years before the pledge to our flag was written. Some blame this division on our previous president, Barack Obama, in part for attempting to address problems related to income inequality and health care in ways they perceive to be anti-business, thus bad for the overall economy. Others look to the Republicans in Congress, who defined their job as whatever it took to make the 44th president appear to be an abject failure, emphasizing obstruction over governance. Whichever you believe, those years paved the way for our current administration, elected on a promise to drain the swamp only to assemble the wealthiest cabinet in history. The idea of the average American gaining access to a fair shake growing smaller while the division of our people grows deeper. Enter the Indivisible Guide, a how-to take lawful action for those who feel liberty and justice slipping further from our collective fingers. With this guide as its blueprint, indivisible groups of citizens are popping up all over the country, which brings me to our very first guest. Now, a conversation I had with Joyce Vansean, founder of the group Indivisible NOLA. Hey, Joyce Vansean, founder of Indivisible NOLA, is here with us. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Let me ask you first, how did you come to decide to get this thing rolling here in New Orleans?
Well, for me, it was definitely a process. During the campaign last year, I was, pretty actively involved. And then after the election, like a lot of people, I was very despondent and wasn't sure what I was going to do, ranging from leaving the country to, all sorts of activism ideas were coming to mind. And then I went to the Women's March in D.C. and I got back from that. And right after that was the first Muslim ban. And that day, I, like a lot of Americans, sat and watched on TV and just decided then that I had to do something. This had to be turned into something productive or I was going to be lost. And so I just started looking on the internet and I found the Indivisible Guide and I thought it was so simple and I believed in everything that it said about just the very simple ways to lawfully protest, to have my voice heard by my congressman. And so I looked for the one in New Orleans and there wasn't one. And I just, took a leap of faith and started it. And it grew faster than I ever could have imagined.
Well, so how many members are actively participating these days?
Well, we have about 2,600 Facebook members and, I think almost 2,000 Twitter followers, somewhere in that neighborhood. And it's, active engagement is different. There's a lot of people who all they do is make their calls every day. Some people, they're just going to show up when there's a town hall. Some people are only going to show up when we do fun sort of themed protest events. And some people are there just to have conversation and share articles and feel like they're in a safe environment to discuss these things on the internet without fear of being attacked by people who believe differently.
Well, I mean, every little bit helps at this point. Exactly. So, people have different lives and they can give whatever time they can give. Talk to me about the principles of the Indivisible Guide. What spoke to you? And tell me about some of those principles.
So it's in part based on what the Tea Party did to shake up politics when they really didn't like the way things were going. And it's based on four things. They talk about town hall meetings, going to your town halls or hosting them if you have to. Having local public events to draw attention to your group and to your cause. Visiting the congressman's district offices and coordinated calls every day to keep those staffers busy answering phone calls. And it achieves, sometimes you can have a win and, you can win a battle in the war, but mostly it's about delaying things, making them hear you and be considered versus them just rushing through their agenda and doing whatever it is they had in mind.
What happens when you make these calls? I mean, do you ever experience any pushback from some of the staff members or people that you speak to at some of these offices?
Sometimes we kind of have fun conversations about, oh, did you talk to, so-and-so today? Yeah, he was kind of grumpy. Or, no, everybody was really polite today. So I think it depends. These people are young staffers generally, and they have busy, they're busy with things to do. So sometimes the tons of phone calls they get about a specific issue, like recently healthcare, probably interferes with their day, and they might not like it so much. For the most part, they're receptive. They take our information down, and that's that. And once in a while, you get one that's having a bad day, and we just try to understand that and keep moving.
Well, you mentioned that part of this, to slow down some of the processes that are turning right now. What do you say to someone who questions your patriotism for trying to stand in the way of what they perceive as progress?
Right, that's interesting. I think both sides say that. When Republicans spent all of their time obstructing Obama, we, thought that was blocking progress, and now they see us as blocking progress. So it definitely cuts both ways. As far as patriotism, I feel like getting involved in the political process to express your beliefs, and in my case, gathering a community of people together that have shared values and shared ideas about what our government should be doing for us, to have them express that in constructive, legal ways is very patriotic. In fact, I'm giving more time to my country now than I ever have before. So to me, dissent is patriotic. This country was born of dissent, of political dissent. So expressing when you don't like the way things are going, I think, is even more important than expressing when things are great and going your way. And I think for those of us on the left, the years that Obama was in office where we weren't this engaged, we're paying the price for that now. We were coasting along, and I think many of us, not everyone. I know for me, I can say that I should have been more involved.
You think complacency kind of got in the way?
Absolutely.
Well, so tell me though about some of the events that Indivisible NOLA has held. What are some of the places where you feel like you are making some progress for the indivisible causes?
Well, I think the most, obvious things are when we can get our congressman in the room with us. We've had, Senator Cassidy has hosted a few town halls where we've shown up, and I feel we've made a difference. Sometimes they weren't pretty, but in the end, he heard us and he saw our faces, and he knew that we were from, Louisiana, and he couldn't deny that. And there was a conversation, however difficult it was. And Senator Kennedy refuses to hold any town halls. In his words, he thinks that the point of them is that we want to make him look stupid, so he will refuse to host them. So we've hosted them in his absence, where we've spoken to his little makeshift office and, just a coat,
Sure.
a suit jacket on a hanger.
Well, I mean, regardless of who actually checked his box in the voting booth, he's supposed to represent all of us. Shouldn't
exactly.
he be willing to hear you out?
Exactly. So having our voice heard, I think, is the number one most important thing. But there's also so much that goes on. Some of our events, like what we did for 4th of July, it is about protesting, it is about getting the word out, but it's also about camaraderie and socializing with these people that have become our family, since the election. And so I think there's a lot of different ways to make a difference, and a lot of different ways Indivisible NOLA is making a difference. Not all of it has directly to do with how we're going to win in Congress, because we're not going to win right now. We understand that we're the underdogs. We don't have the power. But there's so much coming together and taking action and slowing things up and making people consider alternative points of view that's happening that I feel is really worth it.
What efforts do you take to try to mobilize people? Because, I mean, we can all talk about this, till we're blue in the face. Action is what is important. How do you mobilize people? How do you motivate them to actually get up and do these things?
Well, I'm a counselor. So I approach everything from a relationship perspective. I believe that relationship is the most important thing. So I've always said, if you provide opportunity for people to build relationships, they will keep coming back. They will keep coming to protest. They will keep making their calls because that's where their friends are and that's where their relationships are. So that's a big part of it, is providing this platform for people with shared values to come together, make relationships, and then depend on one another. So getting those coordinated calls in every day, putting out the call of the day, telling people, hey, look, this is what's happening. This is how to make your call today. This is what you can say to make a difference. And having, our congressman's office flooded with, 100 calls on one day, all about the same thing, makes a difference. Anything from that to hosting these public events that are sort of fun protests, or doing the more serious business of mayoral candidate town halls and town halls with our congressmen. But also, we recognize that we are new to this level of engagement and to activism. And we find it's really important to defer to leaders in the city who've been doing this work forever. And every city is different. So across Louisiana, there are other cities where they have Indivisible, where they're the only activist group in the city. So they have to take a very different role than we do in New Orleans. In New Orleans, we recognize that there are activists who have been doing this their whole lives. Okay. There are groups that are led by people of color who, they know what they're doing. They know how to do this, and they've been doing it right for a long time, and they need our support. So what we do is we reach out to those groups, we partner with them, we ask them, how can we serve your agenda? We can get people to show up for you. We can make calls that you want us to make, and we can come to your protest if that's what you want us to do. So that's a big part of it, is understanding our role in the community is not to reinvent the wheel, to parachute in and show everyone how it's done, but to learn from those who've been doing it and to support them.
Excellent.
You can find us on all of our social media at indivisiblenola.com. And there's a lot of ways to get involved. So I founded the organization, but I'm a collaborative leader. So very immediately found a way to make a structure that was sort of coalition based. I don't make any of the decisions on my own. We make them as a group. So we have a steering committee. That's 7 of us that more just emerged, the people that emerged as leaders in the group and have shown that dedication. And then there's a leadership team that leads all the committees. And that's the group where a lot of the real big picture important decisions are made about what we are going to pursue and not pursue. Like, we're meeting this weekend to go over all the issues facing New Orleans, and we're going to decide what our platform is, what our sort of wish list for our next mayor is, so that we can grade all the mayoral candidates along those issues.
You have a preview of any of those issues?
Sure. I mean, supporting the minimum wage is an important thing. We voted to adopt the People's Assembly's agenda, which has, the $15 minimum wage, and a bunch of issues that are really important to us around, spending less money on jail and law enforcement and more money on jobs for adolescents and programs for adolescents and mental health, things that are for the people, that we feel will enhance, our environment.
How does Indivisible want to take on the issue of income inequality?
Well, there's a lot of ways to do that. I mean, starting at the local level, we are really pushing for that $15 minimum wage, the raise. Companies like Walmart and McDonald's, they pay their employees minimum wage, and then the government has to subsidize, their ability to live. They can't live without government assistance, which taxpayers fund. So they're paying for things like Medicaid and housing assistance and food stamps. And, as we know, Walmart has had to have toy drives for their employees and things like that. So what we have are taxpayers actually subsidizing the salaries of Walmart employees so that, they can actually afford to live, and that adds to Walmart's bottom line.
So in effect, we are sort of subsidizing a system of corporate welfare so that they can have the cheap labor and we can pick up the rest.
Absolutely. Walmart spends between $6 and $8 million a year in lobbying, and we, subsidize Walmart and McDonald's combined $153 billion a year in subsidies.
So these millions, it's a pittance compared to what they're getting in return.
Absolutely.
Yet they don't want to invest back into the country that is giving them all this
Absolutely.
opportunity. We're clearly at a point where, once upon a time, long ago in our American history, the New Deal said, okay, if you work, it doesn't have to be at a job that requires a deep level of skill. It doesn't have to require a high IQ, but if you work, you can live. And the last few decades seems to have greatly undone that social contract. How do we get back there?
I think, putting the interests of the people ahead, and this, to me, this is one of the biggest causes of division in our country, is that so many people are financially disenfranchised. They are working hard, they have made good decisions, and they cannot get ahead. They cannot make ends meet. They're still suffering. They can't afford to raise their families in the way that they once could.
Can't even
so
stay above water.
Right. And so they're looking for a reason for that. And they, depending on their political ideology, are going to blame, whatever in their mind works and whatever they're being told by the people that they believe.
Mm-hmm.
All of us do that, So I think, income inequality is a huge issue that we can make a difference. We all should be engaged on a local level at figuring this out.
Some of these inequalities have sort of come at the expense of our public health.
Absolutely.
Healthcare suddenly is not attainable for everyone, and nobody else wants to pay for it. We always hear the phrase "Make America Great Again," like it's supposed to mean something. Well, wasn't there a time where healthcare was more accessible and less costly? Well, what do we do about that?
Healthcare is just a huge issue. That is really at the forefront of the resistance right now, because really, as you stated in earlier, when you said that the agenda for Republicans during Obama's tenure, when they did not have power, was to just try and make him look like a failure. So a lot of times now it feels like the agenda is just to undo anything good that he did.
Right.
So the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, although it does have its issues that need to be addressed,
Of course.
It's an outright priority to take it away so that there cannot be that that progress in that area. And also, if the Trump administration wants to make good on its promises to provide tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans, they cannot also provide health care for all Americans. So they have to find a way to cut that budget. And the only way to cut the healthcare budget is to quit providing the level of care and the care for as many people that are getting it.
You bring up his promises. I mean, he also promised on the campaign trail to provide everyone with health insurance, to not make cuts to things like Medicaid that so many depend on. And yet here we are, and the emphasis is on taking those things out of the system and providing the rich with more of a tax benefit to do so. Where can we go from here, though? I mean, what's the best option? Like you said, Obamacare, not perfect. The ACA has its problems. We could probably get into a long debate as to where those problems originated from, or where the original bill was before it got torn apart and watered down to something that was found passable by Congress just barely. But does it seem like a workable situation to take a system that has issues and fix them by making the issues bigger?
No, I think one of the things that we're facing as a country is just as divided as we are politically. There's also these sort of bipolar wish lists, right? That we want this and we want this, and those two things are directly at odds. We can't really have our cake and eat it too.
Right.
Everyone, just like you said, Trump promised, that he wasn't going to touch Medicaid and Medicare. He promised that, healthcare for everybody was going to be great. But he also promised these tax cuts to the wealthy, the people that support him the most. And he can't do both of those things at the same time. And he learned that really quickly. So he's, even having to push through something that he himself called mean, because that you can't the numbers are numbers. Math is math. You can't bend
That's
it.
right.
And a lot of the things that we're fighting about really are at total polar opposite odds. We cannot satisfy the needs of the super wealthy and the needs of the needs of the super wealthy and the needs of most Americans at the same time. The wealthiest people cannot keep getting wealthier and keep withholding more of the money. That top 1% controlling 80% of the money in our country, that can't keep happening. And 80% of Americans be satisfied with the money that they make, with their lifestyle, with their return on investment in education. That those two things are not going to be compatible.
Right. Well, so, it seems like when more Americans had opportunity, things worked better.
Absolutely. There was a time when employers provided retirement plans and health insurance, and there were more small businesses at play, and that was workable. But now with this model of the wealthiest people and corporations controlling all of the money, they end up then controlling the politics by lobbying, by making campaign donations, and then their interests get served by our politicians. And this is on both sides of the aisle. This is not something that's just strictly a Republican thing.
No, I mean, as
money in politics is bad for all of us.
Absolutely. Money in politics is there, and unfortunately both parties now, I mean, you can't let one party play the money in politics game and not play it as well, or you get drowned out by the biggest megaphone.
Absolutely. It's sort of like, this thing that you find with athletes taking steroids. If everybody on the court is taking steroids and you're not, you're never going to win. Not to say it's a good thing to take steroids. Really, everyone should stop.
But what do you do with that kind of conundrum?
Exactly. It's like that with money in politics. Everyone needs to stop doing it for it to work. You can't have one side doing it and one side not. And I hope that most politicians, regardless of party, originally go into it because of a desire for public service. I think, maybe I'm idealistic, but I really do think that's how they start. And money in politics makes that really difficult really quickly.
Well, and it feels very tough. I think that, if you go into politics, you can go in with the greatest of ideals, but the way the system is set up, you're going to get dragged in to the minutia of something very difficult to navigate.
Absolutely.
Without starting to play into it, and then your ideals get left behind, as do the people you're supposed to represent.
Yeah, because eventually you have to take a stand between those two things that are at odds and can't be accomplished at the same time. And when money plays in, there's really, if you're idealistic and you think you're doing this for public service and you're there to do some good, if you want to keep doing that good, then you need to accept the money. And you need to make the right decisions so that you'll keep getting that money and you can be reelected. So I think there's some way that gets twisted where they think that that's the best thing to do.
Right.
And I honestly believe that if we could really just cut it all out in one fell swoop, which I know it can't be done, I think that most politicians would really like it, because I think they would rather be able to choose their ideology and their politics and the people that they represent over these big corporations. I really believe that. I really do.
This is our attempt to try to make it fair, not just for the people that have the most money, but for everyone, because we're all supposed to be the United States of America.
Absolutely. Indivisible.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us, Joyce. Is there anything you'd like to leave us on in particular?
Just make your calls, use those apps, get engaged. I think that this is our opportunity, really. That now is the time to speak up and have your voice heard.
All right, thank you. Well, we'd love to have you back again real soon.
Thank you so much.
And for Make It Fair, I am Harmon Dash. Thanks for joining us.